Hello, hello, hello. How's everyone doing? Hey, chap, I see you made it. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Good afternoon, good day to all. Good evening to some of you all. As I mentioned before, these are going to be pretty sporadic and random. I did a better job this time. I did give I think 24 hours. No, probably less than that. Probably like 12-hour notice versus 90 minutes last week. But it's the same format, really, just kind of going through the Q&A on different items that were received throughout the week. So I will be sharing my screen. I have a few things teed up, but anyone in the chat, feel free to go ahead and list your questions out that you may have, and we can go ahead and get started. So actually, what I'm going to do, I'm going to share my screen here in a little bit. I'm actually I was in the middle of a demo, and it seems to be running now. And actually, let's get started with this one. So what I was trying to do, and I'll level set this because this is a common ask for people who are dealing with. Here's the scenario. So the scenario could be you're in an integration situation where you have data in one system and you're trying to find a happy medium on how to get data out of one system and load it into SharePoint. So in this scenario, it's going to be loading it into a SharePoint list, because we all know once you're in the SharePoint list, you can pretty much do anything that you need to do with the data. So in this scenario, let me go ahead and share my screen. This is where we have, hold on, flickering. Hold on, what's going on here? Let me try this share again. There we go. So this is where, let me just make sure I do a sound check. Can you guys hear me okay? I'm actually in a different location. I have a different setup. I just want to make sure my audio's coming through okay and you all can see my screen. If you can just kind of give me a thumbs up or leave me a quick confirmation in the chat, that would be great. I just don't want to get too far into this and then realize that the whole thing couldn't be heard. Hey, Polly. Awesome, awesome, fantastic. I appreciate that. Thank you, S1HL3. Our YouTube handles are hilarious. But I know Rob and his handle only because we had a prior engagement, which was pretty cool. All right, so let's get back to the story. So the story is, I have this data coming from a CRM system, and let's just call it Salesforce or any other CRM. Not necessarily Dynamics, because we know that we can integrate with that directly, even with some of the other ones with the right connector. But here I have a CRM, and it has all of my contacts. And based on these contacts, we're capturing some data. So we're capturing like the phone number. This is like their console for their Tesla. And this column J has the Tesla model, so on and so forth. So what we want to do, we want to take this data, go into our flow, and import that data into our flow. So here, this is actually spoiler alert, this is actually how you would do it. This is the end result of this actually running. But let's walk through this scenario a little bit. So here I have a site for all the Model S. So basically for this particular site, what they're trying to do is, hey, Ravi, how are you? Thanks for joining. So what they're trying to do is basically get this information to a SharePoint list. This Model S site is for the Model S team. And here we have a list that has client tests. And again, right before this call, I was actually testing this out. And then here you can see I have some data coming in from that Excel list. So let's build this up. So the first thing you want to do, let me go to this particular Model S site. and just go to new, and I'm gonna create a list. And the good news is I'm gonna create from an existing list, so that way I don't have to sit here and retype the schema. And I want to go with this client test. So let me just click on next on that. For our instance, let's just call it clients. And then we want to show this in the navigation so we can easily get to it. And that's fine. Now, when you look at this, this is just going to replicate my Excel, right? It's just going to be, if you scroll up to the top, in this Excel, we have, let me see, and this has like 65,000 items. And this is why you don't do a simple copy and paste, because it has, you know, the short number of items that come in with it. So here we have email, first name, last name, basic contact information, city, state, office, phone number, so on and so forth. So in my list, I'm going to replicate those columns. And here's the beauty of it. The beauty is I don't necessarily have to grab everything, right? So if that Excel has way too many that I need to, way too many columns, and I don't need, and maybe, you know, maybe that Excel file has 50 columns, I only need 5. I can just specify the 5, because in Power Automate, I'm gonna do the mapping to kind of make that happen. So here we are in Power Automate. Let me just go to flow. Let me create a new, and then I'm gonna create a instant flow. And you can do this on a trigger or whatever the case may be. So let me call this load. Let's say load CRM contacts as an example, right? And this is going to be a manual trigger, and then I hit create. So the first thing I want to do is grab that Excel data. Now, I'm going to walk through the steps, and I'm going to show you where things kind of fall apart and how to resolve it, and so on and so forth. So I'm going to grab that Excel data, and here I'm just going to get the Excel connector. And so let me just do, if that Excel connector was not available to you, here we got the Excel connector. I'm going to hit Excel Online for Business, and then these are all my available actions, right? And if we're coming from SharePoint or use like SQL or anything like that, we look for like a get rows or get items or something along those lines. But in this scenario, what we have to do is list rows in the table, right? Because if you look at this Excel file, this actually does not, this is like the raw, like this is, imagine this was a CSV. We open it up in Excel, and now we're trying to massage the data, so on and so forth. So because that action is expecting this to be a table, quote unquote, what we have to do is do insert on this Excel file and then hit table. It will automatically, no, I would say it will automatically select the cell. So here I'm going to just hit the top corner, insert table. I wanted to create a table for all of my rows. All right, and hit OK here. And then now this is going to convert this to a table. And this is the format that Power Automate is expecting this data to be within, right? And I screwed something up because my table did not. Maybe I don't select them all. Let me see. And because this is so much data, like every little action takes some time to get through. All right, so anyway, it's going to create a table, and then we have that table. Unfortunately, I do have that file already in the library. So once I get in the table, I'm going to upload it to a library so that I can have access to it from Power Automate. And then from there, I'm going to say list list rows in the present table. And then it's going to ask me, okay, where does this file live, right? So in my scenario, it's going to be in my Model S site. So let me just scroll down to Model S here, right? And I just drop that into the default document library. So let me select that library. And then the file, I just click on this folder icon over here on to the right, and then navigate to the Excel file that I want to pull in, right? So once I have that, and then here's the magic. And you see how all these options are required. So I have to click the drop down, and any table that I created, and obviously you can have more than one, but because I only had one table in that file, there's going to be my table. Once you have that, you're golden. The next step is just to create an item, right? So here I just go new item, and then I'll just go create. I want to create an item, and this is going to be my SharePoint connector. We're all used to this, right? And now I'm into standard Power Automate stuff. Find my list that I want to create the item in. There's the site. We have the two, but the one that we created together is client. So I click clients, and then I I click save, but actually now I need to do my mapping. And then this is why I wasn't concerned with having the same number of columns as that Excel file, or even trying to match the type. And here I have the capability to do different transformations and all the other fancy stuff that I want. So in that Excel file, I actually do not have full name. So now I can concatenate, because all I have is first name, last name, but I can do a simple concatenation of, and you saw that, right? As soon as I click on that token, it realized I'm dealing with a collection. So it dropped in my apply each, and that's exactly what I want, right? So now I can just go ahead and map all these in, right? That's needed, and all my emails and all this other fun stuff, and we're ready to rock and roll. So I'm not going to say, I mean, here it's just a mapping exercise. Maybe I do want to call my Tesla model, and then I didn't put an ID on here. See, and that's the other thing. Ideally, you probably want to put an ID on here to get this rocking and rolling. But, you know, once you kind of do the mapping, I left a couple holes here, but that's, you know, neither here or there. I think we're all understanding what the gist is. I save it. I want to see this in action, right? So I want to confirm that it's actually loading the data. So I hit test and say I'm going to do a manual trigger, because I'm going to test this, and then test it, confirm all my connections, and then just go ahead and run the flow, right? So now this guy is going to run, so we can flip back over to our Model S site, hit refresh, and there we go. Just like that, we started to load data in. And this thing is going to run like, okay, here's the test. The test is, we know that sometimes when we like list rows in a table, or get rows from SQL, or get items from a SharePoint list, there's a cap. So the test is going to be, does this bring back everything, or will this just bring me back like a default 2048, which seems to be a magic number, or a default 100 or 1000, or whatever the case may be. So we'll see, you know, how this performs, and if it will load in everything or not. So we'll let that run in the meantime. Awesome. Awesome. All right. So just looking in the chat, any questions on that one? Pretty clear. Okay, so we got VS chiming in on different ways to do this, and it's each its own, right? There's no right or wrong, right? I think it's good and better, and the good and better really depends on your environment. VS is highlighting some key things, like, okay, what if you need to have governance, or, you know, is there a streamlined way to do this? This is quick and easy, right? Imagine a scenario where you're a power user, you have this data in Excel, you just need to dump it into a SharePoint list, so that way you can automate it. You're a power user, you may not be an admin to have access to all these other items, right? Azure is more of a pro dev tool, and this is more of like power user, citizen, developer, so on and so forth. The key to this is, and there's a ton of scenarios you can throw out, right? And the key to this is that I have a bunch of data in Excel. I want to bring that in, because I know as soon as I get into my ecosystem, I can now build Power Apps on top of it. I can use Power Automate to transform, to slice and dice it. I can have a review process built around it. All the tools that I have at my disposal in the Microsoft 365 cloud, I can now use them to manipulate this data. Now, here's the key thing, though. From a maintenance perspective, understanding that within that SharePoint, within that Excel file, I'm loading right now, and this ended way too quick. I'm pretty certain I don't have all 60,000 items. Okay, so it looks like our magic number. Remember I said that I don't know if that list is going to bring back everything. So it looks like we capped out at 256, right? So now I need to build like a loop to kind of bring all this information in. But I'm saying all that to say, the key to this is, the one piece of data I did not have is the ID. And that's going to be important, because once you bring this ID in, now you can set yourself up to create a Delta load, right? And that's the one thing we know, that when you're dealing with Power Automate and these Power Platform tools, that sometimes to delete, every time there's a change to your data source, to delete everything and to reload it will cost you a ton of time, right? So ideally what you want to do is to build in a process to where you only have to do the deltas. So yeah, I'm a consume or ingest all the data from the Excel file, but because I have this ID and they understand that these IDs will not change, now I can start building a process that says, okay, these are the 5 new records. Let's go ahead and update this. Or I can even get fancy that says, okay, these records from the SharePoint list no longer exist, so let's go ahead and remove them. That's a very complex Power Automate, but it's a better solution. Again, depending on your scenario, could be a better solution than deleting everything and reloading it. But first things first is that we only had 256, so now we have to build a loop for that. So, it's just a different way of grabbing this data and loading it to a SharePoint list. Eduardo, how are you, man? Eduardo from Brazil. We got to hook up, man. We've been missing each other. I'm gonna write myself a note to contact you this week, so that way we can get going on the things that we've been talking about. Okay, thanks, Ravi. All right, so moving on. The other thing is, while we're in Flow, here's another one. The other piece is, how do you, and this is a simple scenario, and we solve this in many different ways. The question came up, how do you send an email notification without you being in the from email, right? So let's just create a simple flow just to kind of tee this up, and we'll show how this is going to work. So actually we can use this, right? So here, let me just go ahead and do a create email or send email. So if I do a send email, we always use this V2 Outlook, right? And then now we want to send this to, let's just say, for example, I want to send it to, I don't have all my devices here. I'm going to send this to Madison, right? So Madison is going to get these, and then here's a test subject, what have you, and then here's the sample email body, right? Very simple email. Obviously, what we do is we use Power Apps as a front. We capture the information, dump it into a list. That triggers a create item, and then from there, we kind of peel off all the tokens from that create item. The problem is that when this email gets sent, if I'm the app maker for this particular flow, it's going to be sent as if it came from me, right? And usually we want to manipulate that. So the magic is actually in this connector here. And you see that I already have, let me zoom in here so everybody can see. I keep forgetting about that. If you look at these connectors, this connection I already have an M365 service account, and ideally that's what you want, right? So if you select this, whatever you have, and here's the pro tip. The pro tip is whatever you have as a connector, that's going to be used to be the sent by, right? I know there's many different ways you can do this. Some organizations do the dedicated rule, and you have to go into the Exchange online to set that up, and it gets messy real quick, and it doesn't scale, right? This solution, having it as a service account, the biggest question is going to be, well, do I have to share the credentials of that service account to all my app makers that want to use it as a send from? And the answer is no, right? So how you get around that? So we have a service account. So that's the biggest takeaway. So set up a service account as a connector, and then this email will be sent on the behalf of the service account. Now, if I have another app maker, like say, for example, if I switch over to the persona, let me switch over to Keelan. So here I am as Keelan. Let me go into Outlook. I'm trying to get to Flow, so I have to click on one of these real quick. So I'm in Outlook. I got my app launcher now. I can launch Flow, Power Automate, right? So here I got Power Automate. Now, Keelan does not have access to that service account. He does not have the credentials of that service account at all. So what Keelan's going to do, he's going to go along his way. He's going to start building this out, right? So he's going to say, okay, let me create a flow. Let's just do something very simple. I'm going to do an instant flow, manual trigger, test from Keelan, right? And he's going to go ahead and create this. And he's going to put in the action to send email, right? And then That's establishing everything under his name. And then same deal, right? We're going to send it to Madison. And then here's the test subject. These are real world scenarios, by the way. And then here is body information, ... All right, and a lot of misspellings and all that fun stuff. All right, so here I am as Keelan, and I save this. And now I try to switch the account. As soon as I switch the account and say new connection, we're going to get the prompt that says, okay, give me the credits of the connection you want to use. He doesn't have the service account. So what he needs to do is to get out of his flow, invite me in as an owner, right? And then as soon as I come in as an owner, I can then associate that service account to his flow, and then he will be able to use that service account within his flow without knowing the credentials. That's how you get around it, right? So now you can have, okay, so now I should have flows here. If I go back to my persona, go to share with me, I should see Keelan's, go into edit, and all of those credits should be part of my credentials. So now I go to add new connection, and then add another one, and then start typing M365 service. Nope. I must be using a different browser. Bear with me 1 second. Let me see if I can do this quickly. If not, I'm going to just have to speak to it. So if I go to I feel like I'm in there. Hold on 1 second. All right, so if I go to this one, I'm trying to understand. All right, so M365 service, M365 service. So if I go here, sign in. I thought this was going to be saved in my browser credentials, but maybe I set this up under a different browser. All right, so now if I put in the credentials for this, hopefully this works. All right, cool. So many passwords, so sometimes I get mixed up. All right, so now I have that over. That's going to be the service account. I can save it, right? Switch right back over to Keelan. So here's Keelan persona here. And now he can go in here and edit. And now he has access to that service account, right? So now that he has access to that service account, if he has to create another send email action, right? Now he has the ability to toggle between his account and the service account, right? I have to do that one time per flow just to establish that connection. And then once he has it, he can use it in other scenarios. Let's see if he can use it in the approval. Actually, I haven't tried this. So now if I do the approval, let's say start and wait. And then if I go to the connections, yeah, see, and he's going to have to contact me again. But most of the time, you just need it for send email and maybe send approval too, right? But I think send approval actually comes from the Microsoft account already, right? So that's not one of these scenarios, even though there is a little nuance that's dependent on that connector. I think like the body of it says something like from, and it has a connection name. So that may be something you want to look at. But once you get those two connectors established within the Power Automate and you share it, Keelan should be able to rock and roll now, and he doesn't need to know the creds about that service account. Okay. Okay. So I'm checking the chat, see how we're doing. How's everyone doing? How to use old data in Excel to return only data table in a filtered way. Actually, that's a really good question. I don't know that one right off. Very, very good question. Oh, send a email notification V3 comes from an anonymous account. Oh, okay. That's a really good point, Polly. So Polly says, okay, if you want to use, which one was that, Polly? Send an email notification V3. This looks like the generic one. So can you specify the from? Oh, it just used a generic account. Okay. And this looks fine. I mean, I see all the same capabilities, right? As far as like attachment, the file name, you can do BCC, you can do two names. That's interesting. It's interesting that they separate. There's a separate field for the display name of the two, and that's different from the email. But no, I think this will work too. This will absolutely work. So that's the other scenario. So if you want it from, I assume when you say the generic account, that's going to be the generic account in a sense like the general Microsoft Online, which is interesting. Oh, okay, so I see that it does specify mail, and then you also have the opportunity to. Let me say, or do you have the opportunity? No, you don't. I was going to say I saw the new connection. I just assume you can then specify a different account, but in that scenario, you do not. That's good to know. Thanks for highlighting that. Okay, so it doesn't go into your sent items, and I think that's fine. I mean, for most scenarios, that's fine, because for most scenarios, when you're sending the email, you're not really using Outlook to confirm if the email's been sent or not. You're probably using looking at your list and things like that, like the data repository centered around that solution to confirm the status or whatever the case may be. So not having that in the sent items is probably not a big deal, but that's really good to know. I didn't know that. That's really good to know. Thanks for sharing. All right. What else? Ravi was asking, I have a question. Is there a way to remove the requested by service account name in the subject line email when a task email is sent to the approver? Yeah, that was the other scenario. So with the requested by, you're right. I think this is where you add the, if I'm understanding you correctly, I think this is where you add the other connection. So if I wanted to do requested by a service account versus my name when this approval request is sent, that's the same scenario where I would use the service account to kind of be that display, right? And here's the other thing, and I'm starting to see the life cycle of these, especially in large organizations. I'm starting to see the life cycle in these in the sense that these from, and especially if you're building a Power App or a Power App solution for the entire organization, it just seems, I'm going to say unprofessional, but it's usually not what you want to have your name as the app maker branded in all these emails that are being used by everyone within the organization, right? So I think having a branded service account to represent all those emails is probably a more, maybe I would say it, more professional way of doing it, right? And things along those lines. I mean, I'm seeing solutions being built like termination requests or termination email notifications. Like, you don't want your name associated to, termination and things along those lines. So in that scenario, to Polly's point, either use this generic one, which is going to be the email, but, to Ravi's question, when it comes to the approval piece, maybe have a service account as the branded face for those types of requests and actions. All right, awesome. Oh, it uses SendGrid in the back end. Interesting. And that's good to know, right? Because understanding like which connectors these use in the back end is really, really good to know, because the other piece is most organizations are starting to look at not only rolling out Power Apps and Power Platform within the org and setting up the whole process of governance and citizen development and resource sites to kind of help citizen developers use these tools, because you don't want IT to be the bottleneck. So there's this whole process on how do you open this up to the org? How do you get people the right resource and training to use these tools? But on the flip side of that, it's going to be the governance, right? Because the governance then says, for citizen developers, I'm not going to open up all these connectors. I'm going to lock you down to these 5 or 6, right? So understanding which one of those connectors, if it is SendGrid that's being used by the send email notification v3, then that's a connector that from a governance perspective, you have to allow the citizen users to use. Governance, I should do a whole series on governance because I'm starting to learn some very interesting scenarios on how do you roll this out in a safe way, and how do you deal with the fact that every licensed user, right? So if you're licensed to use the Power App solution, you're also licensed to create a Power App solution, right? And that's the default setting. And so far, we haven't found the trigger, or Microsoft hasn't released the capability to turn that off, right? It's the same scenario that we have with Teams. With Teams, you can create Teams by default as any user, but then you have to jump through hoops to kind of lock it down that says, no, don't allow them to create Office 365 groups, which have a ripple effect on other systems. But that's one way of doing that. But that same trick in Power Apps, though it's not 365 groups, right? There is no container or setting that says allow everyone to consume a Power App, but don't allow everyone to create a Power App, right? So you know it's a catch-22, unfortunately. Okay, so what else do we have? So awesome. All right, Paulie, thank you. Thanks for joining. I know this is a Saturday and people have to run and all this fun stuff. Let me get through some of the other questions that were submitted. All right, so Microsoft Teams. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about Teams, tips and tricks, a few things that came up along the way. So here, if we go to Tesla, Deshaun, one of the questions we had, how do you quickly find files within Teams? And what do we mean by that? So basically, here I am within Teams, and we're interacting with Teams, we're interacting with channels, we're interacting with files. And here's the scenario where you're in, for example, this QA template, and I'm manipulating this test plan, right? And let's just see, new item. Can't spell this morning or this afternoon. All right, so here I got a new item, and I'm done with that. So let's just close it down. And then I kind of drift off to another area, right? So I'm interacting with the quality team over in this separate team. That's probably a bad example because I don't want to use the same name. So here I am in the requirements, and then let's just say test requirements, and I start collaborating with Madison on this document, right? So the big takeaway is that I'm in Teams. I'm across many different scenarios as far as like many different channels, many different chat groups. I'm sharing files, left and right, back and forth. How do I get back to that test plan, right? Without having to remember where it was stored. I know I was working on that document, like where's my recent? So I can either search, obviously, so I can do test, search on test, and it's going to bring up, execute the search. So it's going to bring up, a bunch of results, and I can consume it that way. Or what I tend to do is use this files icon. There's files app over here on the left bar. So if when you click on that, everything that you recently touched will be in that order, and it's just a quick way to get back to where you were, really quick to get back to the action. So a lot of people forget about this files icon or the files app that's over here on the left bar, or it may be tucked away under the ... under the ellipse. So, if you use it often, just go ahead and pin it to your bar, so that way you can quickly access it. But this has been my saving grace many, many times, because I'm context switching throughout the day or even throughout the week for that matter. And I'm jumping between different apps, different documents, presentations, Excel, Word docs, whatever the case may be. I just click on files and that puts me back. So that's just another power user tip. The other piece we run into is that here we are in our Microsoft Teams, and let's just say I'm under this Office 365 COE. And we all know that within Teams, any member has read-write access to a lot of these channels and files. From here, what we want to do, now this COE is huge, right? So if I go into Manage Team and you take a look at this, I have 3,100 users and guest users because this is an example of an org-wide team, right? So everyone in the organization who has a license is going to be able to be a member of this team. And they are a member. And because they are a member, they have read-write access to everything within that team in the channel. So here is an example where I want to lock people down. You see this lock icon? This is different than what I'm going to show you. This lock icon is being triggered because I have a classification set up for this particular site of the do's and don'ts. This is an org-wide. I know it's exposed to everyone in the organization. There are certain things we're monitoring, and there's certain policies or features or capabilities that's defined by the policy that allow the user to do or not to do. That's what that padlock means. But here I have these training videos for all 3,100 or 3,200 users, and I don't want them to manipulate this. So here I am Deshaun, so I have full access, but let me switch over to Ethan as an example. So if I go to Ethan, he's going to be a member. And in that training videos, we have everyone in our Power Apps team loading up these training videos. And here Ethan comes in. Let me find the folder. And here's Ethan in the training videos. And he can actually delete the video, right? Which is something we don't want. Or he can change the name of the video. I don't want any one of those 3,200 people to be manipulating these files. But we have an org-wide team to where they have access to everything. So first thing I want to do is to switch back over here to Deshaun, who's the owner, is to actually make this entire channel read only, right? So here I'm gonna go into the general channel under files, go over to open in SharePoint. And once I have that, I understand that these folders, right, represent the channel, right? So I have the general folder for the general channel, the Power Apps folder for the Power channel. Here, I want to select this entire general channel, manage the access, right? And I know that all of my members within that team are going to be under this members group. By default, this members group have edit access. I'm going to just knock that down to view. So now what I have in an org-facing or org-wide team, I just lock this down, this entire general channel, to read-only access. So if I switch back to Ethan's profile and then hit refresh, so that way, I get the latest and greatest. Notice what happens, especially with what used to be padlocks. Now I have padlocks and a pencil with a line through it, meaning that I don't have edit access. So the delete option disappeared, right? So I don't have delete anymore. I do have the ability to download, which is fair, right? So we allow them to download. I also have this rename. So I can still change the name, even though I have read-only access. That's weird. So here, let me go attempt to change the name and just say Ethan's in the house, right? And then hit save. And then just like that, I get an error, right? So even though the option to rename is not removed, similar to delete, but he cannot rename. I mean, read only is just that. It's read only, and you can't rename things. And this is a much better scenario, right? This is if you have an org-wide team, we understand what the default settings are from a security perspective within teams, but we also understand that because it is just a SharePoint backend, when you start looking at things in the context of files, we can now go over into SharePoint and fine-tune the security access that's needed. The same is true, right? If I look at this general, and you saw how I knocked down the permission options to read only, notice that I have this internal only. And maybe this is meant for, okay, I have this org wide, but all my owners, we collaborate on future trainings or future campaigns that we want to expose to the organization, but we want to do that in a private way. And there's several ways you can do that, especially within teams. One is create a team just for the internal users for the same effort, or better, is to lock this folder down to only the owners. And it's going to be the exact same trick. So if I go back to my Deshaun persona, who's the owner of this team, I can now go to open this in SharePoint, go to this particular folder, manage the access on this folder. And again, I understand that my members, all my members are going to be here. They have read access. I'm actually going to kill that and say stop sharing, which means 0 access. And I have this weird, here's another member one. So let's, again, 0 access to this one as well. And then only my owners will have access to this internal folder, right? So now if I go back to my Deshaun persona, hit refresh, as an owner of this team, I should still have access to this folder. So me and the other owners of this organization-wide team can collaborate and start scheduling and working on our future items. If I switch over to my Ethan persona, who is just a member of this org-wide team, once I click refresh, notice what happens. Not only does he not have access to that folder, but he cannot even see that folder. So he doesn't even know he's missing out on what he doesn't have access to, right? It's just hidden, right? So again, leveraging the fine-grained security trimmings and settings under SharePoint allows you to jump in and manipulate the default security settings in Teams to do what you really want to do. Now, let me just level set here and let's be clear. When I showed you was how to manipulate the files within a particular channel within a team, right? That has 0 security on or impact on the post, the wiki, or any other application that you bring within that team, right? So that's the caveat. So yes, you can fine grain the security to a channel, but only in the realm or the scope of files and not necessarily the post. So when you get to a situation where, okay, this is an org-wide channel and there's a lot of conversation that's happening here, which is the intent for an org-wide channel, but now we want to fine tune that to maybe only the management within this org-wide team. What we're going to do is create a channel with the right security settings for that. Oh, and I'm doing that under Ethan, who's not an owner. So you only can do that under the owner profile. I have too many windows open. Let me clean this stuff up. So again, so if you're trying to make the conversations private, that's when you graduate up to a private channel. So here I go to add a channel. Here's the security setting. Lock that into a private channel. Let's just say management only. Click next. And now I can bring in out of my team membership those users that I want to collaborate with on this management only private channel. Okay. So again, just understanding what you have at your disposal, especially with the files, because there's a lot of questions that come up with, I hate Teams because, team members have rewrite access to everything. And, I'm trying to lock things down, and then you start to create more teams, or you probably prematurely create private channels. And we know that private channels create another site collection, and things get nasty real quick, right? So use your folders and your files in SharePoint to manage the security pieces to that, to really kind of emote. And I would say 90% of the time, that's going to be enough to satisfy that requirement. Okay. Switching over to, here's another situation. This is going to be Teams and SharePoint. So here's the scenario. The scenario is, let's look at this org-wide situation here. I have an org-wide channel and I have these training videos, and there's a lot of good stuff in these training videos. Users, the end user does not care that, or really make the connection that, oh, these files are available in Teams, but the other files I'm looking for may be available in my general SharePoint, right? So here, if I am Ethan, let me switch over. Let me open up a new tab with SharePoint. And Ethan does not have access. I can do it with this persona. So let me switch over to our intranet. So this is the Tesla intranet. Here we are in the Tesla intranet, but over here on Teams, we have all these beautiful files that are being captured in this context within Teams. But on the intranet, we have a different scenario. But I have this search, and I'm kind of used to searching across for files and information that's available on the intranet. As an end user, it becomes confusing that says, oh, if you want that file, you need to go to Teams, like this MS Teams training cover page, right? If I'm on the intranet, MS Teams training, if I don't have a duplicate, right? I don't see that in my initial results. I have other ones that have similar information, but not that particular deck, right? And it becomes, especially with an org facing, or even like if I'm part of a team, whatever, if I'm in the intranet, I still want to be able to find those files that I may be working with and dealing with in Microsoft Teams. So how do you do that? There's a couple ways to do it. One way is a organization way, meaning that you have your SharePoint admin add the home attribute, right? There's a home site attribute that you can enable for a site collection. And when you do that, when you execute a search at the search bar of that site, it searches the entire tenant, which includes files in your Microsoft Teams, because that's going to roll up on the SharePoint piece of Teams, right? The other way would be, as a owner of the site, just associate your SharePoint site, associate to your team, to the hub. And what do I mean by that? So here, if I go into Open SharePoint, here's my team, right? And this is the site collection for my team that's represented by Microsoft Teams. I can just go to the gear icon, site information, and associate that to the Tesla, in this scenario, intranet. And as soon as I click on save, a couple of things happen for me. One, for my users of this team, now they still have access to the full depth and breadth of the global navigation, which is convenient and nice. And also, if I go back to the intranet now and click on search, and now do that search on MS Team, what was it called? MS Team, sorry, I forgot the name. Training cover, MS Teams training cover, right? So now if I do a search on MS Teams training cover, and this may not be there yet, and it's going to take a while, but now everything within that, because it's now associated to the hub, associated to the intranet, if I have access to those files in my Microsoft Teams, I can now search and find those files from my search bar on the intranet, which is a much better experience for the end user, right? And it doesn't change security. Associating my Microsoft Teams site to the intranet does not automatically enable everyone who has access to the intranet to now have access to my team. That association is not going to happen, right? There's a scenario to where you want that to happen, but that's not this case. And if you did want that to happen, there's an explicit setting that you have to enable. But what it does do, it now allows all of your members of your team to go to the intranet, execute a search, and then all those files under the Files tab within that team are now available to those search results. Again, it's added convenience. Security is still in place, so it's still going to be secure, but it's a convenient feature for your end users. Okay, so what about the limitation of saving a workflow as a template? How do you go about that? Saving a workflow as a template. I haven't saved a workflow as a template. That's actually a really good point. Because in that scenario, I can see that situation. I have to think about that. I can see that situation. So what VS is asking is that, you can create workflows and all this fun stuff, but what if you have multiple sites and the whole characteristic of that site is every time an item is added to the document library, trigger this process, and you got many sites that need to do that, right? So how do you either template that Power Automate flow or process and leverage that within the other sites? And we've seen that and I think that's a gap, right? I had to do some research to see how we would pull that off. But coming from on-prem, you have that capability with the SharePoint Designer workflows, right? So with SharePoint Designer workflows, you can associate it to a document library within the subsite. And then if you replicate that subsite, you can tell it to bring over the workflow with that. Nintex does the exact same thing. So now you have subsite A, subsite B, subsite C. Each one of them have their own version of the workflow. How do you pull that off in Power Automate? I have to take that as a takeaway. I don't know. That's a very good question. I just don't know how you would do that. So I would have to take that as a takeaway. Exactly. Can we re-trigger the flow again once it hits a 30-day duration? I'm not 100% on what's meant by the 30-day duration. So I don't know. Can Power Automate run for 30 days? See, I don't know. Do you have a Power Automate that's running for more than 30 days? Or is that the approval process? Maybe you mean the approval process. That's the only scenario, common scenario I can think of to where a 30-day time span could be problematic. So when you create these, I'm gonna just pick on this one. I think I understand what the question is, and that's the problem with the chat. And forgive me, but I think what the question is that when you create an approval, right? When you create an approval, you have 3 actions to choose from. You can do a starting wait, you can do a wait, and then you can just do a create without a wait, right? And with this starting wait, what this is going to do, this is going to trigger an approval request, and then it's going to wait. And I think what the question is that in that wait period, I think it maxes out at 30 days. So if you send their approval to a manager, and that manager goes on vacation for 2 weeks and then come back, spends a week getting caught up, your request is still back in mind. And then the 4th week, they don't get to it, then that request could die down or the flow could cancel. And then your process just becomes stale or orphan at that point. And then you have to re-trigger it, right? Now, if that is a common scenario to where you have a process flow to where an approval could take 30 plus days to get that approval, then maybe a starting wait approval is not what you're looking for, because a starting wait is then going to pause the Power Automate, and then you fall into the trap of that 30 day window. A better approach probably could be to do a start, and those are the other actions you saw in the approval. Just do a start, and then manually trigger the wait process of it, or even if you even need a wait, right? Maybe you just send the approval and you allow your process to execute, but then based on the response of that, the decision of that approval request, you then do an update to your list item, which then triggers another Power Automate, and then you can continue your flow that way. So you have to get creative, but I think you have enough Lego blocks in there to make it work. But that's a very good point. And I haven't hit that yet. I haven't hit the scenario, or maybe I'm just not aware that these scenarios are popping up and the users are dealing with it. But I never had that scenario where the 30-day duration became an issue, especially in the approval piece. Okay, so Ina asked, Crystal, is there a search that would just search the team's SharePoint I want a widget in my team's homepage where user can search what's available on the team and not all of SharePoint. Yeah, so in that scenario, I think your team members just have to be aware of the SharePoint site, right? So here, if I'm under project templates and I click on files, let me make sure I'm answering the question. Search the team's SharePoint site. Yeah. So if this is in the context of SharePoint, the team SharePoint site, then this search button here, if I go to home, right, this search button on this team that's not associated to a hub will only search the content of this particular team site, right? So here, all these test cases, release calendar and things like that, these should be files under this project template, right? So project report and all these other fun things, test cases. If I go to requirements, functional, like everything that came up in that, and that's what you call the zero query results. I didn't touch anything, right? And I didn't start to type in a keyword. And what the Graph API or the artificial intelligence within search that says, oh, Deshaun, you're sending off these signals. Maybe you're looking for this information. And this is a zero query search result being suggested to me by the artificial intelligence. But yeah, I mean, this seems to work as expected. Sorry, I keep forgetting to toggle my screen. But yeah, I just went to the SharePoint site of that team. And I think this is the behavior you're looking for, to where the scope of this search is only the files within that team. Let's see. Oh, you want them to stay in teams. Good question. So if I execute a search, yeah, that's a good question, because if you execute the search in teams, if I type in release, and then that's a really good question. So let me find an example here. So if I go to Power Apps, equipment, okay, so equipment list column names. So let me go into project templates and start typing equipment list. Yeah, it does. It searches across all the teams within teams that user has access to. I guess that can be confusing, right? Like if you're, especially in our scenario, test cases. I'm part of many projects, right? And I just search in test cases. How does it know which one of those projects teams I'm looking for? Yeah, I lose context in that. That's a good one. I never ran into that scenario. That's actually a good one. To be able to search within that team. Yeah. The only way, the only, without custom building something, the only way, and when I say custom building, I don't think it's like to VS Point like SPFX. I don't think it's custom building that way, but it could be custom building you can actually build Power App solutions just for your team. And maybe that's it. I love that. I'm going to take that as a takeaway. Let me take that as a takeaway. I'm going to go back to this video and pull out all my takeaways. Let me take that as a takeaway. Let me see how hard it would be to create a Power App that would just search that team. I never ran into that. Very good question. I'll take a look at it. Okay, let's see. Robbie, you can search under files, as Deshaun mentioned. Yep. So, and then push them over to SharePoint. But if you want to keep them in teams, I can see that as well too, because context switching could be interesting. Why SPFX is there? I don't think SPFX is there. I think SPFX. Okay, so let me level set here. So SPFX is the development framework for development framework for SharePoint Online, right? And what we're used to, and VS, I don't know your background, but it sounds like you may be used to, huge assumption on my side, that we used to have on-prem SharePoint, and to do anything, usually the simplest things, we had to custom create. So we're always creating custom web parts for this, custom web parts for that, our info path forms for this, or some type of business automation piece that requires some level of development. Since the new, and I'm gonna have a really good session soon on career advice on how you should position yourself and what tools you really should be extremely strong in if you want to be a valuable team member, meaning you're a full-time employee, or you're a staff aug consultant, meaning that you're doing staff augmentation for a client, right? And usually you're treated, you come in and with the same roles and responsibilities as other full-time team members because you're there as a resource stopgap, right? Or you're coming in as a consultant, you're part of a consulting firm, and you're coming in and you're meant to be built and come in with a certain level of expertise and experience to drive the organization to another level. You're coming in with a solution. Your solution, like really, those are the three main roles that we have. Because of this pivot, and a lot of people don't realize what's really happening here. Because of this pivot, and since we don't have to custom dev as much as we used to have to in SharePoint Online, especially with modern SharePoint, and even with Teams and OneDrive and Yammer and even the Power Platform really doesn't require pro dev skills. So there's a huge, gray matter of where do I use these pro dev skills to add value to where a power user just to come up and take my job, right? How do I position myself to add that level of value? To how do I position myself to justify my salary as a pro dev versus a power user? And that's a very interesting question. So I can't address everything here, but I definitely want to do a workshop because I speak frequently to other people who are in this scenario or other people who are working with SharePoint on-prem. The organization doesn't really have a roadmap or not as aggressive as they hope they would be to move to the cloud. And you're feeling like you're dealing with some of the legacy tools and you're like, your skills are like dying this very slow death. And what do? Right? So that's another scenario. But to answer the question on SPFX is not dead. There's a lot of opportunity for SPFX, but I think it depends on the organization and it really depends on what role do you play. If you're a consultant, you probably see more SPFX dev than you would if you're a full-time employee, especially a full-time employee where the organization has moved to the cloud. Because when the organization moved to the cloud, the promise of the move is, one, we don't have to manage this stuff anymore in our data center. Let Microsoft manage it. Thank goodness. Two, and that's if they understand the evergreen side of the house in modern SharePoint, we're not going to have to custom dev all of this stuff. Because with modern SharePoint, you're responsive out of the box, you're mobile friendly out of the box, and it has a mobile app. Your UI is modern and it looks great. It actually looks better than most custom solutions that you paid millions of dollars for on your on-prem environment. It looks fantastic. And you get it out of the box. Your web parts, the news, quick links, highlighted content, all these other web parts are very robust out of the box with some configuration. You're ready to rock and roll. Let me show you an example. Let me show you a couple of things. Actually, and this kind of works well into some of the other questions I wanted to address. Let me switch over to a different tenant. And then here is my DJ Tech. This is like the flagship portal that I love to showcase. Look at this thing. This thing has news. And not only does it have news, right? It has news being pulled from many different sites within the organization, right? That is a major custom built solution where I need news to propagate down from corporate to my subsites. And what if I have someone in HR creating news? How do I bubble that up to my main site? And even more, taking the requirements to another level, how do I take my my news from HR, or my news from technology, or my news from digital or marketing, and only bring in certain types of news from those different sites and not have to bring in everything? You can do all of that out of the box, right? It's a beautiful story. And not only can you do all that out of the box and it looks fantastic, look at these other widgets. I mean, you got the countdown to roll. This is the quick links, many different looks and quick links. This is another quick links. This is yet another quick links. Quick links is probably, quick links news and highlight content are probably the most versatile web parts you have in SharePoint Online. You can have many different looks. Here I have a photo gallery. I can thumb through it like you expect with photo galleries, and so on and so forth. And not only does the look and feel is nice, the functionality is there as well, right? So here on the right side, these are my links. Okay, this has to be custom. That's smoke and mirrors. Don't get caught up on that. But I mean, like here, my recent sites, that's my recent sites as the current user, right? So any site I recently touched will be here. Featured documents are my featured documents as the current user. So any document that I recently touched will be available to me. We talked about recent sites. And then also my news, right? My news is I have bookmarks to where I have so many articles. And that's the other thing, this is a thought process, or, just a mental shift. Most of your sites are going to be publishers, meaning that, no, just think about this. And I'm going to get back to the news. Just think about this. You have human resources that came up with a policy. There's a new dress code, return to office. COVID we're hopefully on the tail end of COVID. And now we're getting back to work. Now there's a new dress code. Now there's a new vaccination requirement. Now there's a new, whatever, right? So HR is producing these policies, Word document, posting those out. But to make everybody aware of it, usually there's an email that says, hey, this thing is out there. But now there's going to be a news article and an email, right? So news articles are going to be like the communication vehicle. And because they're so versatile, you can use summaries and email them out. You can do a standard email and reference the article, right? You do your teaser text in the email, and then you have the link to the full breadth. And then that article is going to highlight the document or the policy. So now when there's the new, there is a news article to come out. So now your intranet is going to be like MSN or CNN or, Fox or whatever, their websites, where you're going to have news information coming from everywhere. So now I'm going to navigate to that article and say, oh yeah, this is interesting, right? And here you see my related news, right? Based on category. That's another thing. Like once you take out of the box and marry it with metadata, your ability to hit most of your requirements with out of the box functionality goes through the roof exponentially, right? So now at the bottom, I don't have time to read this. Let me save it for later. And, rich commenting, likes back and forth, at mentions, all of this is out of the box. So now if I go to my homepage where I land, this arguably could be buried, but the sample article that I recently tagged, and I think this is it, is available to me for me to read. And when I'm done with it, and this is personalization, I'm only impacting my stuff on the homepage. And when I'm done with it, I just uncheck it as a bookmark and it goes away. And then my other, wait to reading or my reading list just keeps growing, right? As I go around it. So Spfx complements all of this, but it takes you to a whole new level. It takes you to a whole new level of not only in skill, but also in your thought process, right? Because now we went from blank canvas, custom build everything, to, okay, now I have a pretty rich and functional canvas out of the box, let me pepper in those pieces that need to be built. But before you start to pepper in anything, you got to have full command on what you can do out of the box. And I would almost argue full command of the Power Apps and Power Automate tools that your pro dev or your power users or citizen developers are going to be using. And you have to get in front of that so you can become a mentor to them. Now, here's the other thing. I don't think pro dev in this space is dead. I don't. I think pro dev is on a totally different level. You're not going to be building one-off solutions that says, oh, let me build this web part that grab HR documents, right? You're going to rather build web part that grabs whatever HR documents represent. Maybe that's a itemized security trim document to where the security and the level of complexity to set security or access to that document, you're representing that in a much easier and easier to consume way. So what you're going to be building is reusable components that can be used in different areas and not what we used to do in 2017 and beyond. And I'm talking about years, not SharePoint versions, of where you're building these one-off solutions. You have to broaden your thought process and say, okay, how can I build this in a way that it can be reused? And there's a balance, because it's build it to where it can be reused and not over-engineer it to where this thing does everything, right? It's like, you have to scope it. And that just comes with experience, right? I would say go with the minimum viable product and then layer in. But when you're building that MVP, you're making everything configurable, right? So using web part properties more so than, if you're a real pro dev, you've been using web part properties and making things configurable anyway, but you're going to take that to another level and balance it with not over engineering it. So very good question. And I think that really speaks to the workshop I really wanted to do, because I've been thinking about that, because I get so many questions and I listen to so many responses and I watch so many pieces, but there is a vacuum. I mean, just to be straight up, there is a vacuum. Like pro dev in the SharePoint space, one, you're not going to be called a SharePoint developer anymore. You need to be a Microsoft 365 developer or solution developer or engineer, right? Engineer seems to be taking the development piece. And then you have to understand everything. You have to understand what do you have out of the box, master it, understand the configuration, understand the settings, understand what you can and cannot do. And two, and a lot of us don't have this. And this blows me away, and I don't understand it, but you got to have your own Office 365 tenant. Everyone on this call, everyone watching this should have an old 365 tenant, developer tenant. It's absolutely free. You get E5 licenses. You get 25 licensed users to play with, right? And you need more than one, right? Because you need to, as I showed you, here I am with admin. Here I am with only member. Here I am with admin. Here I am just a visitor where I read only access, right? You need that variation, that variety to really kind of fully test, but you need that. You need that. You need to understand like what's in the admin section, what you can and cannot do, what you can and cannot change. And when you change it, what's the impact? And you go in much stronger. So when you submit your help desk request and say, IT, I need you to do X, you know exactly what to ask for. And if there's pushback or if there's questions on, okay, you set in the setting, what is the impact? What is this going to do? You have evidence of how it's going to work and what it needs to happen. You should be building your own intranets. If you have a company intranet, replicate some, especially if you're going through that migration process. This is how we used to do it on-prem. Okay, how can I do this in the cloud? You need your own tenant to kind of prove that out, right? Anyway, that touched on the spot that I'm very, very passionate about, because I think a lot of people in this space, a lot of dev, especially pro dev, I have a huge passion for them. I feel like they're being left behind because they don't really understand what the future holds and what's around the corner. And it's scary, and it could be sad if you're on the wrong side of that coin. It could be really sad. It could be really sad. Okay, anyway, sorry about that. All right, so I need to develop an application that will give different groups access to various folders over time. Which tool is best? Power Apps, Automate, SPFX, or something else for this? I need to develop an application that would give different groups access to various folders over time. I guess the biggest question would be, what determines which folder they get access to? You can set access using Power. Okay, so very good question, by the way. Thanks, Robin. Very good question. I will always start with Power Platform, always. Understand where Power Platform, how far Power Platform would take you, and then where SPFX or something else is needed to kind of fill in the gaps. I would look at SPFX as a pepper or a seasoning to a meal. In your case, a custom application would be the main meal. So I would use the Power Platform to provide the main meal, and then when there's not enough seasoning, salt, pepper, whatever, that's where SPFX come in to fill the gap. The same is true for Azure Functions, right? That's another pro tool that you will have to look into, because being a pro developer, you need to maximize Power Platform and then put in SPFX Pro Tool, Azure Function for custom services or API, or even bundling Pro Tool. And what we're starting to see now, and actually been working with someone who's actually, I think it was Paulie that left. He had to leave. Man, you look at his channel, and it may be Paulie. I'll put the link in because I really want to shout this person out. They figured out how to use some pro dev concepts within Power Automate, and it's light years. So they actually read, for an example, you have a list of 25,000 items, and you need to read all 25,000 items and manipulate them or updates or do a delta process, whatever the case may be. This person realized that calling that, we know we can get items, right? And it does this loop and it does this thing. And we know there's limitations to that. But calling the HTTP function or send an HTTP request to SharePoint, which is an action in Power Automate, versus get items from a performance perspective is night and day. I mean, I think one process take, and I'm guessing here, 2 hours, but he demonstrated 30 seconds, right? Same amount of data, same Power Automate, just a different approach. Again, pro dev versus power user, right? So I'm saying all that to say, start with the Power Platform. There's a really good maintenance story to the Power Platform as well. Start there and then pepper in your SPFX and or Azure Function and or PowerShell. You know, those are all your pro dev tools that you may have. Very good question. Okay, what else? Full screen carousel SPSX from my last. Oh, fantastic! Absolutely, I love that. Yeah, a lot of companies, and thank you. Yeah, so Jennifer, to your point, good job having a dev tenant. I would say absolutely, right? Absolutely. Now, to your point, companies do ask for the kitchen sink, and part of that is because they really don't know what they want, right? And they hear there's a couple of reasons why they ask for, and I wouldn't let the job application or the job post deter you from applying, right? So if you have Power Platform, but you may not have the legacy pro dev like C#, .NET, or whatever the case may be, I would still apply. The reason why, from my experience, that they ask for a lot of the legacy stuff, and once they couple that with the new stuff, the modern stuff they're trying to go at, it's because they're trying to transition, right? They're trying to take those .NET on-prem or .NET batch jobs and convert them over to Power Automate scheduled jobs, right? They're trying to take that C#, Bootstrap, JavaScript form and convert it over to a Power App, Canvas app form, or even a Power form. That's what I call it. That's just me and I picked it up from someone else. But Power form is really just Power Apps form that's tied to a SharePoint list. You interact with it in the list. They're trying to go that route. So they're trying to take all of this legacy pro dev stuff that took them months to build and convert it over to something that's cloud hosted and fits well within the SharePoint ecosystem. When I do my career talk, I'm gonna make sure I bring in some recruiters to kind of speak to what they're seeing, because it'll be very interesting to hear it from the recruiter perspective. Because the recruiter, when they go after and I don't know how to phrase this, but I would almost recommend, if you're looking for a place to work, go through a recruiting firm to get that job versus applying for that application directly with the company. Because I think applying with the application directly with the company, it just puts you in a pool and you become a number, whereas the recruiter can get a personal feel for you if they're really good, and then shop not only your personality, see if you're a culture fit, which is huge. I would say some companies are hiring based on culture fit more so than they are skill set, especially full time. Because if you're a good culture fit and you have the technical app to learn the skill, and this is the perfect time to transition, because this is new for everyone. No one's asking for 5-6 years of Power Platform dev experience, because it's so new. At best, you're going to get 18 if someone is solid, 18 months if someone is solid. So having that personality sale in addition to your technical app to get the skill set and, maybe transition, that may be the way. But to your point, they do ask for a lot because they want someone who know the before and then master the after, right? But here's the case. The case will always be, if you know the after and you don't know the skill set for the before, I have other resident or tenure knowledge here that someone else can help you out to help you transition, right? So that's why you see that huge boatload. But recruiters are starting to dial it in too, because a lot of them just don't know what they want. And a lot of recruiters don't even know how to tech screen or even, screen for Power App developers because it's so new. So interesting. Okay. We're almost 90 minutes in. So let me show you. Let's just wrap with this other one, because I think this other one is interesting. Let me show you multilingual capabilities within modern SharePoint and how they've grown. So I've already done one to where we actually build this site. I don't know if we build this site from scratch, but we do a fair amount of it, or at least talk about the framework. But when this was built out, you have the ability to change your languages, right? And just to kind of level set on how multilingual was done before and how Microsoft is doing multilingual now in modern SharePoint. So for now, what we're doing is that instead of going with let me pop this whiteboard up, and this usually takes a while to fire up. But instead of going with a multi-sub-site approach, or even a multi-site collection approach, which used to be the 365 way of doing multilingual, we are now graduated to a single site collection approach with the ability for the end user to select their preferred language. So ideally, let's just level set here. We need to create an intranet that handles 3 main languages. So English, French, and then Spanish, right? And what we did before on-prem, we would use this thing called variations. And in variations, there would be a single site collection. And then for each language, there would be a subsite, right? And then the most important thing with multilingual sites is not necessarily the multiple languages. And usually out the gate, that's pretty straightforward to handle. It's the maintenance process with multi-languages. So ideally, you're going to have a new page here that's created. And then the question is going to be, how do these people get notified, one, that this page needs to be translated, and then two, how does the other languages get notified that of the content, right? And what does that mean, right? Do they have to recreate this page from scratch in their own language, so on and so forth? And that's what the variations was. So variations really had like a timer job or a workflow process that says, here's a change, update these people, that there is a change, they go in, they translate it, so on and so forth. So that was our Rev 1. Rev 2, and let me just draw a line, and that's on-prem. So in the cloud, what we would do is that they would have these language packs, right? And variations had language packs, and for every language you had to install the pack, so on and so forth. But now what we do, now we have the English, the French, and then the Spanish, but these are all different site collections. And there are different site collections where a primary language is the language that we wanted to have, right? So if we had English, when you create the site, you set the primary language. And then French, when you set to create the site, you set the primary language to French, and so on and so forth. But then there had to be some type of communication that said, I'm creating this page, you need to create a similar page in your language, ... You need to create a similar page in your language. And this story right here was not ideal. I would almost argue that this scenario here on-prem with variations was a better solution than having these as standalone site collections, because you did not have this workflow that says this page needed to be created XYZ. You had to do that off system via email or whatever the case may be. So the new one is what I call modern translations, or multilingual 2.0. And basically, and this has been the ask forever, right? The ask forever was, can we please, for the love of the higher being, for the love of God, can we please have everything in a single site collection, right? Because it just made sense. And two, because even with variations, when you have multiple languages, the trick was always what was the right language for the current user, and then somehow navigate to them to that right language site, right? And then there were scenarios where someone was multilingual, or you needed a way to be able to bounce between the site for a particular page from an end user perspective. So how would you give end users the ability to either, one, set their preferred language, that every time I go to the internet, always push me to the Spanish version of the site, and that's a preference for the end user, or two, allow them to change that preference, and that usually require some type of custom functionality. So now what's happening is that we not only do we have the same site collection, we actually have everything in the same library, understanding that pages are stored in a site pages library. So now what I have an English folder with all my English pages. I have a Spanish folder with all my Spanish translation of the same page. And I have my French folder with all the French information for that particular site. So now if we fast forward to what that looks like when it all comes together, you get a situation like this. Here, as an end user, I can bounce between different sites. So here's the English version. And you would notice that all my copy is in English. And now as an end user, I can say, I actually want to see this site in French. You can see the French versions of this site. Now, notice what's happening here. Here, I get a mix of English and French. And the reason for that is what's happening is that for this particular site or this particular page, there is not an French version of this article, so it's going to serve me up the English version. But if there was if there were a French version, then I would get that. And these web parts, again, just speaking to the robust functionality of the out-of-the-box web parts, these web parts are now tuned and developed in a way that same web part, but based on its source, if it has the language that's selected, it would then serve up that version of that page for that site. Now, when we built this, just to fast forward, and I did a YouTube video on how to set all these up, even quick links and the anatomy and how all these are stored and all the other fun stuff. But the problem at the time of that video, and this is the new, is that the mega menu could not be translated. So regardless of what language I selected here, I will always be presented with the English version of the mega menu. And if you wanted to translate the local nav, you can do that, but you had to do something weird. You had to change your preferred language into Portuguese, then navigate to the site, do all the translation in Portuguese, and then flip your preferred language back to English, and then, and then so on and so forth. But from an end user perspective, even if they did speak Portuguese and set this as the preferred language, they wouldn't see the menu in Portuguese unless their preferred language was that. So it was still a weird experience, and the way that you had to manage it was weird. But now, with the recent update, I can click on the edit option, and this is my mega menu. Click on edit for this mega menu. There's a new option here that says translations. Click on that, and now I have the ability to translate each one of these slots for the languages that are supported. And now this is a much better experience because now I can do these translations and everything just works as expected, and I'm ready to rock and roll. The same is true for the local nav. So in the local nav, I'm running out of real estate here. I accidentally clicked on create site. Now I'm in this weird pattern. Hold on. Let me zoom out. Yep. So now even here, I can click edit, and this is my local nav. Again, translations is here, and I can manipulate the different language slots for that particular link. So again, a much better story from a maintenance perspective. Everything flows the way it should. From a notification perspective, here's a new item. Everything flows the way you expect it should. So let me show you a couple things behind the scenes, and then I think we can go ahead and wrap up this session. Very good session today, by the way. So here, if I go into site contents, that's not a pat on the back. I had to rethink it once I said it. That's not a pat on the back. I'm just saying that the questions were very great, and it took us in many different directions. So here, if I go into site pages, this is what you can expect to see. You can expect to see for every page. So if my primary language is English, those pages will not be dropped in the folder, but any other subsequent or secondary language would have a folder equivalent created for it. And then if I click on ES, this is going to be if the page did have a translated version, they would be stored there. So if I go into FR, you can see all that information, so on and so forth. Now you may say, well, Deshaun, you got a ton of pages, and then when you clicked into the language folder, I didn't see the same representation of the pages. And that is true. So if I click on Ionic Man, which is, I just assume this is not a translated page, those pages only get created once you're, okay, now I have the English version of this. We're ready to rock and roll. Now I'm okay with this being translated in the other languages. This is where you explicitly say, click on translate, and then for each one of these, click on create, and it copies a version of this page into those respective language folders. Not only when I click create did it move that a copy, it also notified the translator assigned to those languages that now they have something to translate. And this makes sense, right? Because if you think about the life cycle of a page, I don't need to notify all my translators when I'm working on this page because they don't know when I'm done. And I don't want them to start prematurely to start translating. And here I go, add in more copy. Here I go, add in another web part or whatever the case may be. Because whatever I add, they need to replicate, right? And if I click on that create translate too soon, I can create more work for my translators, because if I then go in and add another web part as an example or an image, they would have to replicate these steps and they won't get it for free, right? Whereas if I wait until this page is done and I get all my, sign-offs and approvers from the people who are reviewing these pages, then I click translate, then the final state of that page, that will be the starting point for those translators, and then they can just jump in and just focus on translating the content, right? So that's one. So let's look at what does it take to create a multilingual modern translated site, a modern multilingual site. First, what I do, I go to the hub, click on this create site, and of course you can create it here, or you can go to SharePoint and create the site collection there. If you create it at the top of the hub, it just associates that new site to the hub for you automatically. One thing to note, modern translation is only available for communication sites, right? So that's one thing to note. If you start down the rabbit hole of creating a team site, you're going to notice that the multilingual translation capability is not activated. I don't know if that's a future feature or if that's a position Microsoft is taking. So, definitely make sure you understand that. So it has to be a communication site. And then let's just call this the help desk. And then this is where I specify my primary language. So even though it's multilingual, I'm going to keep this to English, right? And this is just going to be the primary language for this site. And then once this guy is created, I can now hit the gear icon, go to site information, and then go to view all site settings. And then over here on the left, I need to click inside of the language settings. Now, once I'm in language settings, there's a toggle that says I want to enable multi-languages for pages and news. Just go ahead and flip that on. Once I do that, now I'm getting this UI screen that allows me to specify the different languages that I want to support. So in this case, I want to do French and Spanish. Where's Spanish, right? And then not only do I specify the language, I also specify the translator. So Madison is going to be my Spanish translator, and then Kevin is going to be my French translator, right? And then I click save. Now, these are the people who are going to get notified when there is a French or Spanish version available for them to translate. So now what I do, I can now go in here, and you notice from an end user perspective, if I click the drop down, now notice this, if I click the drop down, I only see English. That's just because I have nothing sent yet in the translation workflow, right? So my translation workflow is empty, and it was never used, right? So I don't have anything for my users to see variations on. So here I'm not going to add anything. I'm going to just go ahead and click translate. Just say, let's just pretend this page is ready to go. And you saw me do this before. So I can click on create the French version of this, create the Spanish version of this. Now my translators just received a notification that this page now has a different version that can be translated. This page is now available. Now notice the drop down here. And this is something I need to test, right? If I come to the site now with the French and Spanish being in draft mode, would they see these options in draft mode, or would they only see the French in the English option? I don't know yet. I have to test that. But here, if I select French, I can come in here and start to manipulate this particular page. And this is pretty refreshing, right? So now because I have my own copy of this page, I can do whatever I want. Not only can I come in here and translate this, but I can also, if need be, manipulate the layout of this page, right? So it's like, oh no, for the French version, I mean French or Spanish. Yeah, for the French version, I actually want the hero here, and then I want my news, maybe like a carousel here, right? And then I can change the format, change the layout of the news. It's the same content. I'm just representing it different. And not only, and here's the other thing that, we kind of ran into with the other ways or attempts to pull this off, was that sometimes we needed more than just translation. So I'm showing you that you can lay out the page, but what if your image selections had to be different, right? Now I can, for the same title, I can select different images that may be more culture appropriate for that particular language, right? So a lot of flexibility here, a lot of flexibility. So I get the English version of the page as a baseline, but once I have that, I can come in here and manipulate this with, however I see fit to meet the needs of my clientele for that particular language. Okay, so really just wanted to highlight this, these capabilities that we have, and just let everyone know that the modern translation, I will say, is ready for prime time. I think the menu translation piece was the missing piece initially, but now that has now kind of been available or full featured out, and now we're able to rock and roll and can tell a very compelling story with that feature. All right, fantastic. Well, I'm not going to take up most of your time. I really do appreciate you all, and I love this audience, right? Because these are what I would consider those who carve out personal time to elevate their skills, right? And we're a kindred spirit because, using your weekend, and I know everyone's busy. Weekends are really meant to rest, relax. But if you're like me, you're always watching some video. You're always participating in some training. You're always noodling or trying to figure out a better way of doing X, right? And that's the sacrifice, right? You can't get it done during the day, because during the day you're putting out fires and you're constantly working on your day job, right? And to be skilling up, and it's almost like LeBron James, Michael Jordan, and all of them, or Bruce Lee, or what have you. Any of the greats always practice in repetition and just hone their skills when everyone else were walking dogs or out in the park. And not saying any of that is bad, but that's the difference in the person, right? And that's why I love, and I debated. I was like, man, I got to carve out a time slot throughout the week to have this. But then I was like, I don't know. I mean, the people I really want to target and the community that I want to surround myself in are going to be people just like me. And this is the telltale, right? The Saturday sessions are going to be the telltale. Anyway, thank you all so much. I'm not going to hold you up. I know this is your personal time. This is your really R&R time. I'm going to let you go. Thank you for joining. We may be here next weekend. I don't know, but click the bell, the alarm, whatever it's called, or subscribe so you get notifications when I post these up, because I always set them up as live events so that way you can adjust and provide. Again, keep those comments coming. Keep those questions coming. Ideas even like Paulie. I mean, I learned how, with the different send email. I probably consume more. I know I do. I consume way more, probably 3x, way more training videos than I produce, because it's a pitch and catch scenario. Someone's probably knee deep, 100,000% focus on a particular area and knows all the ins and outs of that area. So there's always something to be learned. There's always shortcuts, tips and tricks and things like that. Have a great weekend. Thanks again for joining. Keep those comments and questions coming. I'll queue them up for the next Q&A. Until then, take care of yourself, and I'll see you then.